At one point, it was foolish. We have a detachment of Marines on board. The battleships have, and cruisers have a detachment of Marines. And somebody had the bright idea to, now we're well behind where the fighting goes on. We're in North Korea. And somebody had the bright idea that they would send these Marines and sailors on shore to assess the damage. And they asked for volunteers, and I didn't volunteer. They needed a radio man, but I didn't volunteer. And that, the Koreans, North Koreans, let them get about, that was foolish what they did. They let them get about 30 or 40 yards from shore and opened up. And fortunately, nobody was hit, and they turned around and came back to the ship. And that was the end of that. But we went up both sides of Korea and firing day and night at targets. And since I was a radioman, one of the duties I had to go down to what is called a fire control room and man the phones, and the fire control officer I received from the helicopter people. Of course, I was just one of the radiomen that did this because it's done around the clock. And I would receive from the helicopter people the coordinates. And they would put those coordinates, those guns are electronically controlled, so they put those coordinates in those guns. And of course, since they're electronically controlled, they would just, with those coordinates, they'd go up or down and automatically fire at those coordinates. And unfortunately, it was near the end of the war, or the end of the time we were there, while I was on the phone, the fire control officer told me to tell it had a Marine captain and a Navy helicopter pilot, and the fire control officer told me to tell them to go down and take a closer look to see what damage was done. And of course they got shot. And the pilot, the helicopter pilot, even though he was shot, and the Marine officer, I assume he might have been dead, but that helicopter pilot got it back out to sea. But since Korea is so cold, if you fall overboard or you get in that water, they got 7 minutes before they can get you out safely, because you get hypothermia. And they were both dead. We got the bodies, but they were both killed as a result. We had constant firing, day and night, all around the clock. And so
I was going to ask you, as far as those big guns, did you feel the repercussions of the fire?
The ship. See, what happened is, before we got over there was a cruiser over there, and that captain was really foolish. He pulled down the anchor. See, Korea, the water is so deep that those big ships can get in close enough where the Koreans can use their guns and tank guns and fire. And this guy in this cruiser, the captain, he anchored, and the Koreans hit the ship and killed 15 sailors. Well, injured 15 and killed 1. And of course, they called him back to the United States. So when we got over there, what happens is that the admiral wants some battle stars. So we go in close enough where we can be fired at for 3 days. We go in there in the tanks, because we'd come up and watch those shells come at us. But we're constantly moving now, because they learn you don't anchor, so we're constantly moving. But one of the reasons they did it is that they wanted to draw those fires and they opened up with those 5-inchers off the ship and blowed us. But see, one of the things the Koreans weren't stupid. As soon as they fired, they moved. So it's kind of not knowing whether we really hit as many as they think they hit, because. But we did that on several occasions. That's why I have 2 battle stars, because we were under fire for the 3 days or more, as we kept circling and kept firing.
Yeah. So did you actually see shells coming?
Oh yeah, I saw the shells coming.
Yeah. So what does it feel like seeing something coming at you that could potentially kill you or injure you?
Well, kind of. I guess I didn't really feel too much. I get kind of cold and calculating when I'm in danger, and it didn't. I guess I assumed that they couldn't reach us, which they didn't, but they were splashing just short of us. But because we were moving, they would have a hard time to hit us. But, and that's the only team. I was usually busy, but I out of curiosity, I went up just to see. But normally I was down below most of the time. I very rarely got up topside because I was either working or sleeping. So, but we spent I forgot how many months, several months over there, and took shore leave in Sasebo, Japan. And it was there that I heard the stories of that Black 24th, how they were surrounded and how they got out. And
what story was that?
Yeah, the Chinese, MacArthur didn't believe that the Chinese would enter the war. And they were massed, 1 million of them were massed over the North Korean border, and the American troops had pushed up to the border, and the Chinese during the night had surrounded them and left just a little corridor. And of course back then they had the all-black unit and all-white units, and they fired until they couldn't fire anymore. Then they had to get out because the Chinese had surrounded. And I heard this from a soldier when I was in Sasebo, one of the survivors. But we were over there for a few months, and then we, of course, came back. And that's when we came back is when we had to go down below South America, because they wouldn't let us through the canal again.
Okay, now tell me about shore leave. What was shore leave like?
Well, shore leave, Sasebo was a very nice place. We would go to the clubs and have a drink or two, and just hang out until it was time for us to get back on ship. And of course, I forgot how long we stayed anchored, and then we went back to Korea. They gave us shore leave after being in Korea for, I don't know, several weeks, and then we'd go to Sasebo, and they'd let us go ashore for a while, and then we would go back to Korea until we left Korea permanently. And after that, they were going to mothball, which they did, the Missouri. And so they transferred me. Back then, you if you enlisted in the Navy, you had to enlist for 4 years.
Right. Okay, but let's just say before they do the mothballing, before we get to the mothballing, did you come back to the U.S. on the Missouri? You went down.
Missouri was. We came all the way back.
What was that like coming back and going down to South America? I think you touched on it earlier.
Well, see, by that time, now that's the funny part. By that time, somebody decided to send me to radioman school. And so, Missouri, before it was going to be mothballed, went to South America. And so they dropped me off down there in Norfolk to radioman school. But the chief petty officer, who was my